Hey guys, welcome to the Sua Sponte Podcast War Room. We're just going to do a follow-up discussion with Tony Mayne from the Gallant Few. He helps with the Rangers for Life Foundation, and he's just all-around great man. So go ahead, Sarn Gonzalez. I know you got a couple questions for Tony Mayne.
First of all, thanks again for giving us the time and being open and giving all the information you have so far. One thing we talked about in a prior interview was like that ranger mentality, that alpha male mentality, right? And since I've been out, I've had a lot of guys that talk to me and reach out to me and tell me how their lives are going, soldiers or peers. And a few of the guys that I kind of got the impression that they weren't doing good in their life, I felt like they carried a lot of that super alpha, that E5 team leader. I'm going to break through every wall I go through. I'm going to walk in the room and be the man. But when they go into civilian world in different communities, they carry that with them, and it hinders them from excelling in if it's a job or just a community. And what would you tell somebody like that to have them kind of relax and let go, just to kind of fit in more to different cultures or communities?
All right, Ray, so great question. I think if I'm hearing it right, we're talking about somebody who was a ranger who wants to carry that mentality, but it's just not working. All right. So first thing, you probably need to figure out, everybody's different. So we got to figure out a little bit more with each individual. But one thing I'd be very interested in is who's their support network. When you look at Ranger Regiment, you have great culture of accountability. That's what adherence to standards change, but adherence to standards is a culture of accountability. What do we lose when we get out? Generally, that same level of accountability. Right? We can't ignore the fact that some people in Ranger Regiment succeed because of their leaders, not because of themselves. So to then think that everybody's in Ranger Regiment was a leader and they're going to be fine, that's just not accurate. We're still human beings. And what makes a human being successful generally? And what's successful mean, right? Does that mean that they're a number one? To me, that's not success. Like a CEO of a company, that's interesting to me. But there's brigade commanders and brigade command sergeants majors. I know like somebody's got to do that job. Right, like a company's got to have a CSO. So when we go back to that cat who might be struggling, well, goodness gracious, like who's his support network? Where's his positive feedback coming from? Where's the candor? Where's the criticism coming from? And so I find that some of those folks, they may not be in community, and I would want to know who's part of their team. That's why what we do in transition is so important, because we're trying to develop that team with folks from multiple eras to open up that Rangers idea that life is not just about them, right? There's folks who try a job, Ray, and they're not good at it, or they don't like it, but they think they're supposed to be good at it. I talked with Ken earlier, you're supposed to be a good husband and father. You're supposed to be a good American. That can look like digging a ditch. It can also look like inventing the next iPhone. Either one, right? But finding value in your work, that's a little bit dangerous, is what I would tell them, right? I would try to reinforce, like, you're a good dude doing the right thing, paying your taxes. Stop putting so much pressure on yourself.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was actually my next question was the accountability and standards. But I think you kind of answered that with the way I'm kind of looking at it now is when somebody gets out and they leave their team or their squad or platoon and they're out there, they need to find the right people to bring into their circle to help them succeed and to check them when necessary if they feel like they're doing things outside of where they should be.
One thing we do, and for Ranger for Life, and this is on a slide that I have not changed this very much in the past 4 years because it's just relevant. We show like the 7 clinical parts of holistic fitness, right? And intelligence, social skills, what you do professionally, physical, all 7, right? And different people will use different ones. But the point being, we show who's there for you in Ranger Regiment. So when you talk about like mental health, cognitive health, like we have cognitive coaches, like that's a thing. We have behavioral health specialists inside of the brown fence, right? We talk about career development. You have a team leader, squad leader. You got a career counselor, right? You've got, in terms of like intelligence, you've got the post-education office. You've got education counselors within the battalion. So one thing we talk about when folks leave is who's your transition team, right? You're used to going every day and there's a human performance coach. You either do their workouts or you don't based on your leadership. But you've got those folks and you got physical. Do you not want to go to the gym when you leave? Where are you going to go? Like that's a decision. And you should probably look for some place that's similar to what you left. So you've got to build that team, right? So community are like the people you're choosing to be around. But when you're getting out and you're talking about being a better person, like you need people in those functional areas. We are huge on telling everybody that they need some type of cognitive counseling, right? Like this is a muscle and it's the most important one. And it is different from all of these because it controls them. If you are your own brain health coach, like that doesn't even make sense, right? I can't even think of a parallel. So now you know that you need somebody. What is best for you? Like that's where we start with Gallant Few. Like it can look like executive coaching, right? It could look like a routine buddy check with somebody you really expect. But if you're the only person getting inside of your own mind, that right there, that's a no-go. 100% no-go.
That's good advice.
Yep.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You talked about a few soldiers in the last interview, and one of them you said you thought they're going to be successful, but they decided to take a gap from the military to being active in life. What factors do you think people should consider to lead to how long the gap should be? Does that make sense?
Well, that individual, actually, no, he's working now. He had a plan. He just wasn't employed, so I couldn't count him as a stat. So really, we only had 2 guys out of 1,000. But what I would say is, what we try to do is say, what does it look like when you're 70, right? Like, what does success look like in life? And stats will show what we're pushing in America for success does not lead to long-term health and happiness. All right. Mm-hmm. Just being defined by your career, unless it's like a purposeful, I'm not saying this in a bad way and valuing some jobs or the other, right? Like if I'm a clergy member, for example, right, that is kind of like a purposeful income alignment type thing, right? But we've got folks doing all types of jobs, and some people might be an electrician, but they don't necessarily think my purpose in life per se. Does that make sense? It's a service that pays. Okay, so that electrician, right, or that CEO or whatever it may be, all those other reasons you're doing that job, like that's really who you are. So that's what I would say about like the folks with the gap year. Like we're starting at the wrong place, right? We got to start with what satisfies us, and then we try to align the job. And if we can't do it because we don't have the skill set or it's not available where we're at, that shouldn't be the main source of happiness, right? You can't always make work happy either, by the way. And you're going to take that home. So you have the proper perspective that work is an income, right? If you happen to like it too, even more the better when you get home. Plenty of people loved Ranger Regiment and didn't want to go home. Mm-hmm. That's not good alignment. That's not healthy. And it happens for a reason. Right. So in the transition phase, that's where we have an opportunity to kind of look at that and re-blue it. Anywho, I hope that answers your question about that gap year. It's like, well, what is long-term success? What is long-term health? And it generally looks similar for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, and one thing I wanted to say on that, Tony, is I think you pointed out a unique correlation there is a clergy member has a purpose beyond their job, right? It's to honor God and glorify him. And you do that by loving others. So that clergyman probably never really plans to retire. The electrician, on the other hand, is thinking, I'm only doing this for 20 or 30 years, but yet at that same time, in those 20 or 30 years, trying to find purpose in that electrician job. But that's not where the purpose is. And I think that's where the clergyman, or, you know, whatever he is, a Baptist preacher, will have a different idea of that purpose.
And when you find well-adjusted folks in any profession, what do their coworkers say about them? Great to be around, right? If they're not there, things are different. Like, that's what we should, you know, aspire. That's a level, although it looks like leadership, it's also a level of followership too, right? Like, we have plenty that we do complain about in America, and everybody else laughs at us as like the big, rich, fat, dumb person, right? Like on the block, right? Like, we're worried about what we don't have when we already have everything.
First world problems.
Yeah, well, because we worry about the material, we worry about the status, we worry about all of these type of things. Like, you know, we focus on college for these lofty intellectual pursuits when everybody does not have the aptitude to be that level of an intellectual. But we do need people to work jobs.
Yep.
Right. Like, we actually need people to work jobs, which is becoming more difficult to find. Anywho, that's a segue.
Yeah, that was a good point, though, about the material and status. I think that's a big issue in this country, and it's getting worse and worse to a point where people will judge other people for not having as much material or status in their life. You know, it's, for me, it was crippling for a while, because I didn't even want to put myself in a position where I would have to be judged because I wasn't as good as you, or I didn't, you know what I mean? It's just like, it was like when I was in regiment, not regiment, when I left regiment and went to the 173rd, if you had a Ranger tab and all this chest candy, like, you were looked at and you were judged for that, and everybody had a vision of how you should act. There was a point for about 6 months plus where I didn't wear anything because I was tired of, I don't know, just being judged just because of what was on my chest. You know what I mean?
No, that can carry over. Remember times in the Middle East? Remember what the term Abu means?
No, can you refresh my memory?
Isn't that father of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So people will call Abu and then their son's name.
Mm.
I mean, we can learn a heck of a lot about other cultures and other ways of living that we've seen. Very primitive. In some circumstances, and that happiness and joy and how they find it, right? Like, and so that's a big part of what we're trying to do. There's some people who think, oh, I'm only a Ranger, right? I think, oh, I have to go to a different unit or whatnot. Like, that's a personal thing, right? We can't talk about everybody, but like, man, we just want people to realize that they're uniquely made, regardless of their belief structure. I'm a Christian. I don't hide from it at all. And at the end of the day, like, I've gotten instructions of what I'm supposed to be. Right. So the fact that I was a Ranger is just part of my story. Right. Like, if I ever make it to heaven, right, if there ever is, a St. Peter's Gate or whatnot, the only test you get is list everybody that you brought through my son to me. Right. Because that's what we're told. It's a commandment. Like, you're told to do it. And then if you're like, hey, I was a Ranger, he's like, good story, bro. Like, okay, you know what I mean? So let it be part of your story. Take the good, but don't deny that you're supposed to be a good husband, father, and community member. And if you're that, not being able to feel confident that that's enough is kind of, and it's going to sound harsh, it's kind of a you problem, but we have to recognize that it kind of is a me problem. And to be just, I told you, I went through the same thing, man. I thought, being a retired Ranger field grade, there's certain things that I just kind of had to and should have done, and some standard of living things. And I look back at that time 3 years ago, and I thank goodness that I had a mentor like Carl Monger and Sergeant Major Mike Hall that made me feel like what I was doing was enough, to be honest with you. And now I'm happy as can be. It's amazing.
I can tell.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been working on, is especially being in the civilian world for so many years, is, keeping that wall up to not judge people by the material and their workplace status, but by, you know, those 8 dimensions of health that you brought up before, you know, the emotional, spiritual, and you know, make that a factor instead of you know, just putting, you know, he graduated from here, he's a CEO here. And I think another part of that is just accountability, as far as what you were talking about, Raymond. I don't know why I said Raymond. That's the first time that's happened.
Very official.
We'll deal with that later.
Yeah. But with that fear of being analyzed, like when wearing all your, you know, all your badges, everything else. And that was a big thing with me starting or joining you guys with this, is having, you know, my 8 dimensions of mental health or my ranger service analyzed by these people out here who have done bigger and better things, either in service or after. And again, that's a me problem that I think is a big part of just holding myself accountable and finding that purpose that you were talking about, Harper. And I think the purpose of this podcast, with helping those transitioning and helping those in mental health issues or crises, for heaven forbid, is kind of helping face those fears of being analyzed. Because what does that matter if I help a dude who needs help, or, you know, we get somebody to join Gallant Few because they saw our video and they didn't know about it before, and they become a mentor and help hundreds of other people, like that's worth any amount of, you know, my personal fears facing anything. But hell,
Heck yeah.
shit.
You got any other questions, Kyle?
Not as much a question, just as I wanted to hit on that accountability that you mentioned, Tony, that you hold people for, or you hold people accountable when they're trying to do the vet star for Gallant Few. I just think that accountability, either from peers or mentors, is needed once people get out. And I think that's so awesome that Gallant Few is doing that, because I know when I got out, and I've heard stories from my friends, that, you know, once you get out, there's nobody to hold you accountable. You know, if I sleep in an extra 15 minutes, I don't have 8 dudes beating on my door ready to strangle me because I didn't show up for PT. And that can lead to, you know, guys falling behind with their physical, with getting to the gym, or, you know, waking up and doing that mental, that self-care before they go to work. So it was more just me saying I believe that, you know, Gallant Few is crushing it in that, among many other things.
Well, that's what I really thank you all for this platform. And so our 5 dimensions that we use at Gallant Few, you know, we start with the emotional side. Like what's inside your mental rucksack is going to determine your other parts of your total fitness, because this is going to determine what you decide to do or not to do every day, right? That's the thing. That's just the truth. And everybody's emotional health are in different stages at different times. So we talk about self-training responsibility. We want you to get your brain big, just like we want you to get your biceps big, or we want you to get your legs fast, depending on what type of athlete you are. Like that's the thing. After that, then we look at your spiritual fitness, and it goes back to that book, Blue Zones, and every study that's been done in the history of the world, that your spiritual fitness, i.e. knowing what you believe and having core values, specifically if they're in community, is a very important thing in your overall health. All right. But cognitively, the ability to understand that that's important, like that's why it affects spiritual. And the next is physical, right? This is mind, body, and soul 101. Like you got to be moving. But I'm not talking about working out, because Rangers will talk about working out. You can be ripped and in great health if we slept enough and if we ate well, right? That's just true, right? A lot of us work out so we can eat whatever we want or drink whatever we want. I probably fall more into that category. But those 3 things you can control. Right. But a Ranger regiment, at least one of those, the physical, right, which we know affects the mental, right, and then the culture that you're in, which affects the emotional and whatnot, the community controls. When you're out, like, you got to control those. You got to want to control those. You got to have a plan to control those. And you got to realize those things can make you better. Right. So we try to put that in positive. And then the next part is, based on how you look at those things, that should be your profession. right? Like I felt I had to make a lot of money because that's what all my peers I thought were doing, right? And that's what I should do as a Ranger officer. But when we decided to come back to Columbus, Georgia, it was to run the military ministry at our church. That's how we ended up in Columbus, Georgia. It wasn't to help transitioning Rangers. That was an outcrop of knowing whose I am and making a foundational, one of these bottom choices that drove everything else. Then the idea of what I could do professionally, like nonprofit, remote, or in person, that's when that became an option because I was already grounded. I'm blessed. This worked for me. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody else. And that professional matters because now professionally, generally, unless you grow up in the same town, right? Hang out with your same high school friends, your professional network and your spiritual fitness, like that is who your social network is. You are a sum of your like 5 closest friends that you hang out the most with, right? And hopefully everybody has 5 friends. Not everybody does. Hard for me to make friends. But when I count Carl Monger and Sergeant Major Mike Hall and Adam Stolniker and a few other folks from college as like a very close-knit best friends, I'm happy to be a sum of them. Right. And so if you drink too much, if you don't know what you believe and the world's out to get you, I bet all your peers do too, that you spend time with, that you trust and listen to. You just do. I bet it's in the music you listen to. I bet it's in the movies that you watch, the podcasts that you listen to. And that's why what you guys do are so powerful, right? Is because you have the ability to have folks who maybe aren't solid in those bottom 3, right? As we are when we're a little bit younger, a little less mature, and to hear a lot of folks telling them very positive stories of how to get to where they need to be, or a negative story with a lesson learned outcome.
Wow.
And at any point we can all get there, right? We can get out and find that accountability and find that group. Because really when I moved here to Montana, I didn't have that group. Mm-hmm. And the group I found wasn't a good group. But then through those struggles, I found a good group and a good community. And that good community drove me back to the fundamentals that we had in battalion, because in battalion, we had a great community, but we left it and we lost it. But there's a way to find it.
Well, and you mentioned, one of your impetus for doing this was a rash of suicides that you have experienced personally and that have happened in the community. There has been 1 out of over 1,000 folks that I have worked with who has committed suicide. That's 1 too many, 100%. He's also someone who didn't follow up, who wouldn't answer calls. I'm not blaming. I'm just saying, right? It's so that doesn't mean my stats are good, but what we are trying to do, right, as folks get out, is the first to introduce them to community is the right model. The right model is not, I need you to find a professional job that's purposeful so you can make money, do all the things that you want to do. It's to look at all the things that they want to do and to make sure that those are the right things, right? If all the things they want to do are have a speedboat, go to Ibiza, meet a bunch of hot girls, right? All possible. Right.
You're going to sleep.
But where's that going to lead you? It's going to lead you to wanting to have to make more money, to have to go back in comparison, because now your boat isn't as big as a yacht, isn't as big as a cruise liner. Right. You can do that if you want. And I don't blame anybody who wants to maximize their time for income to enjoy life. No, that's not a thing. What I'm saying is when it's a cycle that leads to nowhere and leads to loneliness, that doesn't work out. Generally, it doesn't work out. And if it does, that type of narcissism probably is pretty annoying to be around. So,
yeah, I found so many guys, and I'm continuing to learn myself, who have found so much more purpose in community than any other job that they've had. And even guys who got out who missed that purpose of being a Ranger. The second you bring up Ranger Regiment to them, or hey, how you been, or hey, you remember this happened, their eyes light up again. And it's just like so many guys could.
Well, it's not replicable, right? It's the people. No, it's not replicable. You could theoretically, work at X company that makes a certain widget, and you can go to a different company and it could be better that makes that widget, right? But that's never going to be the 75th Ranger Regiment. Or whatever unit, if you're a veteran, that you were in that you really loved. And that's what's funny. Like a lot of people, they leave the Army and and let's use the Army for this example. But it's a unit. It's generally a place and time that mattered so much. So when we talk about regiment, I don't think we're that unique in the entire veteran experience. We just have the ability to stay there a really long time for the most part. Yep. It's just not replicable. I mean, that's why it matters. That's why it's so special. But what we've got to do then is say, and it doesn't end. Because this is what good service looks like, right? It's always that end state. If the end state is E4, E5 gets out, they maxed out Ranger School, team leader, had a couple specialties, have their security clearance, and that's your marker of success, it's shallow. It's 70 years old, deathbed, whatever it looks like, family line, service impacted other people, right? The battles, the campaigns, the wars, they're going to happen with us or without us, right? But that legacy that we leave with people is probably the most important thing we ever do.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
In your first interview with Ken, you talked about, actually before the interview, we talked about your Operation Rhino experience. And I was just wondering if, I don't know, you can tell a good story from that, or how the experience was from like when you got the notification to on ground, and what from that experience did you keep with you that helps you today or succeed in life?
Well, one thing, to be able to be part of that operation, the fact that Tony Mayne participated in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about yourself and the third person or something like that. The fact that I got to participate is all luck. It had nothing to do with me. Right. Like the event happened. I was there, right place, right time. So I'm no better than anybody else, whatever. Like so that's called a blessing. Right. So I was blessed to be a part of it. And especially at that time, when we look at the totality of the global war on terror and the ability to be on the initial response, ground response, as SF was also launched in the North. And that's in that same night. Just amazing, just absolutely amazing. So I mentioned I was at PLDC getting a PMCS class, right? And what I didn't mention is after the second plane hit and we were notified, the instructor, E7 at the time, she was a real joy. She had said, well, we could turn on the TV, but you're learning about PMCS and vehicles are really important. I know they're really important. But we were freaked out because our battalion was also on the Global Response Force. So some things, don't use a payphone to call back to see if you're going to miss the show. That's a OPSEC violation. Don't do that. That's one story. I graduated from PLDC. My team leader was there. My squad leader? My squad leader was there because I was going to be the team leader. Yep. And got in his car. He already had my Kevlar helmet and LCE. 2 pieces of equipment we used to have in the inventory. And we went out to Friar Drop Zone, that little drop zone right by it. Name escapes me right now. And we did the rehearsal mission. So I went from PLDC graduation straight into rehearsal, right? Come back to the battalion, hadn't been back, Connexes, everything everywhere. Pretty interesting. That was pretty cool. The actual jump hit the ground. My Kevlar came off. Right. It was not operator error. It was on there. A desert floor and an improper PLF makes for a hellacious landing. A lot of people. I mean, you want to talk pitch black, crazy pitch black. When the doors opened, I was introduced to a smell that would be a part of my life for the next years. And we're flying over the desert, right? At least I think we were. Like, I don't know. Couldn't really tell at that point. I was back in the stick. So that was pretty interesting. Hardest part of the operation coming back was knowing that we've lost 2 Rangers, John Evans and Christopher Stone Cipher, in the brownout in Pakistan as they were a QRF for a Tier 1 mission. That was the emotions of doing that operation. Like doing a combat jump is kind of a thing. You're like not handing your static line off to somebody is kind of a big deal. Or the safety, not the jump master. That's kind of a big deal. But coming back and being, as we thought, successful on an operation that we later, was shown on the national media, the jump portion but to lose 2 people. And that was extremely difficult to know that terrain did that. And it was a hellacious introduction of what that terrain would continue to do over the years. That was easily the. So I'm great. I got a combat jump. 2 Rangers died. Right? Did we need to do it? Right? So I've never been one to say, hey, I was on that. I did that. I think it's interesting. Once said I was lucky to do it, but everything in the military came with a cost. That helped frame the rest of my time in the military. And so what I saw later, and a big concern that I saw, and sometimes with the conventional forces, as we stayed there so long, and I'm not criticizing, and I'm not getting political, but the word of, you have to bring everybody home. So we did a very successful operation, lost 2 guys, and we were told that it was a great operation. I learned that very early in life. So you would later hear, you're successful if you bring everybody home. That's not true. And a lot of veterans who might struggle with mental health, I would consider on your podcast in the future, talk about that. That is not true. The enemy gets a vote. You're in a sovereign nation, or in Afghanistan's case, a cray-cray nation. You're there, and they've got all the Russian weapons and Chinese weapons, and they get to shoot them too. And the last thing they're going to do is fight Geneva Convention fair. And to think that you're responsible for not bringing somebody back. Could you have done something different? We all could have. Got it. But once again, going back to that operation where I was not in control of anything, and I thought that we did everything right, and to lose 2 human beings, right? Great young men. It really helped frame leadership, understanding, faith, moving forward.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that story. Man, it was intense.
Dude, it was intense because I was crying, and my first sergeant came over to me. And he's like, did you know him? And I looked at him and I was like, first sergeant, the Rangers. Right. And I would be I'd find out I get emotional with human life for a lot of reasons. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else. Right. But I really do. I get outwardly very emotional about stuff. I'd be in the jock with my conventional units in Iraq and found out we lost a Ranger and just start bawling in front of people. A 2nd Battalion Ranger specialist, I had no idea, didn't know him from Adam, right? Because that's just commonality that we share, right? It's why you started this podcast, when you lost lives of Rangers that you knew, right? Not in combat, but that commonality, we are so similar. It's scary.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Wow. Ken, you got anything?
That's all I got, Tony. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for everything that you did. And thank you for everything that you continue to do. I just ask that, or I hope that this podcast can help guys. And, we're here. We're all here. We're all Ranger buddies. We're all willing to take your phone call. If you're struggling and you need help, reach out. We will answer. We will be there to help you. We never forget the 3rd stanza of the Ranger Creed. And I think it lives with us always. And like we always say here, Rangers lead the way.
All the way, gentlemen.
Thanks, Tony.